Welcome in everyone, this is Sean with MTG808 Jr. and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 8 standard Pauper decks from our Youth Championship Scholarship Tournament that took place earlier this month, December 2nd. We had a great turnout of 21 students showing up to compete for their fair share of the $750 in scholarship that we were giving away. Of course, all of that scholarship money and all of the tournaments that we run are made possible thanks to our very loving and giving and generous Patreon subscribers who donate monthly in order to help make sure that we are running youth standard Pauper tournaments for the youth here on Oahu, and then twice a year we are running these scholarship tournaments to give the kids a chance to compete for scholarship money. So if you would like to help us work towards our continued goal of providing a fun, safe place for kids to play Magic and fall in love with the greatest game ever made, please consider becoming a Patreon subscriber. If not, just watching this video, hitting that subscribe button, hitting that like button is a great way to support the channel. But back to the tournament, we had 21 players showing up, and when the dust settled, we had our top 8 players. 7 of them were playing Healer's Hawks, so we had 7 white aggro decks and blue-red spells. So we're going to be going over those decks here today. All of the decks that we're going to be going over, we will have links in the description to these text versions of the decks, but for now we're going to be looking over here on Magic Online. So this is the first place deck, Jacob. Congratulations to Jacob for taking down the tournament. He was on a bit of a tear going into this tournament. He had won, 4 of the last 5 tournaments that he played in prior to playing in this tournament. Most of those tournaments took place before rotation, and he was playing mono-white aggro, but he came to this tournament to prove that mono-white aggro is still a thing. The way that we have been seeing the mono-white aggro decks being built here in our standard Pauper tournaments is lots of pump spells and combat tricks. You can see here that he has only 22 creatures, but then 18 spells. He has removal in the form of Gideon's Reproach, right? 2 mana, deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, which turns out to be very good if you're in the middle of a combat trick war. But also really good at killing pumped up Healer's Hawks, which was the name of the game. But then we see 3 Moment of Triumph, right? 2 Mighty Leap, 3 Adamant Will, and then of course Healing Grace, just to have lots of instant speed ways to interact with the opponent. This proved to be really useful in the white aggro mirrors that we saw running around all day. And, Jacob skillfully maneuvered this deck to first place. We're going to see a bunch of different ways to build these white aggressive decks, but besides his plethora of instant speed interaction, which seems to be really important for these white aggro decks, Jacob was playing Knight's Pledge. Right? One of the best starts that you can have, assuming your opponent does not have removal, which this particular metagame was very shy on, is a turn 1 Healer's Hawk followed by a turn 2 Knight's Pledge. Right? You're going to be attacking for 3 and gaining 3, and it's going to be really hard for any deck to race that without first killing the Healer's Hawk. So that was one of the innovations that Jacob was using that not many of the other students were using. So shout out to Jacob for taking full advantage of that line. But yeah, the creature selection here, Healer's Hawk, right? 1 mana 1/1 lifelink, flying, Hunted Witness, 1 mana 1/1. When it dies, it turns into a lifelinker. Mesa Unicorn at 2 mana 2/2 with lifelink. And then some flyers, Territorial Hammerskull makes it hard for them to block. Parhelion Patrol and Angel of Dawn top off the curve. And you've got a really solid deck here, backed up by a whole bunch of combat tricks to help make sure that you're winning combat and just continuously applying pressure. So shout out to Jacob for taking down the tournament. He even beat my blue-black control deck in the finals, or in the end boss match. I was expecting to just tear through the white aggro deck with blue-black control, but he managed to get under me and beat me in 2 games, so congratulations to Jacob for that. So Jacob came in first, and here we have Julian came in second. Julian was one of the favorites to take down the tournament. He plays big boy Magic. I think his favorite format is Modern. So he plays Magic with the adults regularly and is very good. So I had no doubt that he was going to do well. He showed up with a really innovative deck, recognized the power of Healer's Hawk, and really just wanted to take full advantage of it. So he has Healer's Hawk and Rustwing Falcon as 1-mana dudes that can come into play early, and then get suited up by his plethora of auras. So he's got 4 Frenzied Rage, 2-mana enchant creature, gets +2/+1 and has Menace. Swashbuckling, 2-mana enchanted creature, has +2/+2 and haste. And then Maniacal Rage. I can't help but wonder if this would be better as a Knight's Pledge, but I think Julian was kind of scrambling for cards when he showed up to the tournament, so this might have just been throw it in the deck, it fits. And then he just wants to drop one of these auras on, you know, a Healer's Hawk or a Rustwing Falcon or a Bishop Soldier or a Mesa Unicorn and just, you know, outrace all these other white aggro decks. In a metagame where there is not very much removal, this game plan definitely goes to town. He's got kind of a plan B of playing a fair game without trying to you know, sneak a game by sticking an aura on a lifelink guy. He can win a fair game with Pegasus Courser or even Wojek Bodyguard, just pumping up and attacking, you know, a fair game. But yeah, he ended up losing to Jacob in the finals. They played a grind fest of a game 1 where I think each player ended the game with like 20 cards left in their deck or something like that. The game went on for like an absurd amount of turns. They were just staring at each other. But in the end, Jacob's slightly higher curve meant that when they were both drawing lands, Jacob, you know, had better top decks than Julian did. So Julian's deck is really good at like going under the other aggro decks and just trying to like, you know, cheat out a big giant lifelinker that's hard for them to block. Whereas Jacob's deck was able to kind of take that line with Knight's Pledge and Healer's Hawk, but also had, you know, a higher curve, more combat tricks that allowed him to get 1-for-1s instead of having to throw away his auras and his creatures in combat like Julian does if the game kind of drags out. But congratulations to Julian. If you want to take a look at the full deck list, click that link in the description down below. But this is definitely one way to approach the standard Pauper metagame. So that's Julian came in second. In third and fourth, we had Christian. Christian came in second place in our first scholarship tournament last May. And he is playing mono white aggro here. He lost to Julian in the top 4. Julian was able to just kind of go under him. So Christian's deck is pretty similar to Jacob's. He is playing a bunch of combat tricks and also playing the 4 Gideon's Reproach here. But Christian's playing a couple more creatures than Jacob was, but one thing that is notably missing is the Knight's Pledge. Jacob was playing more 2-mana combat tricks, which Adamant Will is kind of like a, you know, if you're in a combat trick war, Adamant Will is going to be very good, whereas Moment of Triumph and Take Heart are better if you're fighting on tempo, but if you're fighting on just raw power, then Adamant Will and Mighty Leap are going to just take over. So they played a really good... Jacob and Christian actually did not play in the top 8. Christian lost to Julian. But, you know, their decks are very similar, so we kind of see the power of these white aggro decks. I guess Jacob was playing fewer lifelinkers, and Christian is playing the full 8 2-mana lifelinkers, where Jacob preferred to play Territorial Hammerskull and Silverbeak Griffin in his curve instead. But Parhelion Patrol, Angel Dawn to top off the curve, and then a plethora of combat tricks. So congratulations to Christian for coming in 3rd. And then in 4th we had Daniel playing another Healer's Hawk deck. This is kind of more of a mid-range deck, right? He does have Healer's Hawk in the deck. The slower but more less swingy short sword, right? It's not as big of a blowout when they kill the creature, but it is slower and slightly less of an impact. So he's got the short sword, and then he's got a whole bunch of mentor triggers. So he's got Wojek Bodyguard and Parhelion Patrol to mentor onto his lifelinkers. So his deck is a little bit slower than the other white aggro decks that we're seeing, but you know, he has a higher curve with Barging Sergeant, and then just more 3-drops, right? Pegasus Courser, Wojek Bodyguard, and Sky Knight Legionnaire are just better cards than like Hunted Witness or Silverbeak Griffin. But Daniel lost to Jacob in the top 4, and you know, they went to game 3. It was a really good match, but then Daniel just drew a hand that had 3 Jousting Lances in it. So Jousting Lance is really powerful if the game kind of drags on and you have the time to like spend 3 mana and equipping, you know, ideally a lifelinker guy. But you know, when you're on your back foot, I think Daniel was on the draw. He drew a bunch of Jousting Lances. They're not very good on defense, and he just got run over by the white aggro deck. So this is one way to attack the metagame. Going slightly bigger is usually a recipe for success in an aggro metagame. Although I think I would suggest maybe, I don't think I would play more than 1 or 2 Jousting Lances, and then potentially getting some combat tricks in there to just kind of help him break serve when he's on the draw against these other white aggro decks. He does have Shivan Fires in his board and Healing Graces, so you know, he can kind of sideboard into that if he wants to. But you know, congratulations to Daniel. Almost made the finals. Just got a little unlucky in game 3 of the top 4. Alright, so moving on to 5th place. I am not sure the exact order of this, but Kyle, who won our first championship scholarship tournament last May, he brought a very different build of white aggro to the table. Of course, still playing the 4 Healer's Hawk. Hunted Witness was his other 1-drop of choice. He is playing less instant speed pump, or less of the instant speed pump that the other mono white aggro decks are playing, and he is instead playing the full 4 charges and the full 4 inspired charges. So Kyle's deck here is just trying to go wide. So he's got Call the Cavalry, which is it's kind of card advantage, especially in those white mirrors, and then Sworn Companions to help him just go wide, and then just up the lifelink creature count in the deck, and then to kind of deploy a whole bunch of threats, make a very wide board with lots of creatures, and then lots of creatures are going to get lots of pumps from the 2 charges in the deck. So he played a really good game against Christian in the top 8. Christian kind of ended up punching through him with his cheaper combat tricks, right? The Take Hearts and the Moment of Triumphs and the Gideon's Reproaches are better when the game is shorter, and the game ended up not going very long. Kyle didn't get a chance to develop his board to go wide, and then Christian's spells kind of were at an advantage in that particular matchup. So this is one way to build mono white. Seems a little bit weak to the other builds of mono white, but if you're able to kind of slow them down enough, this deck is trying to win the long game, and it definitely has the tools to do so. Alright, Charge, Inspired Charge, and Short Sword are all great in the long game. So that was Kyle. His twin brother Troy also made top 8. Troy lost to Julian. Did he lose to Julian? I think he lost to Julian. And this was one of the more unique decks that we saw he is only playing 3 Healer's Hawks, which I'm pretty sure I thought he was playing the full 4, but then I saw his deck list and I was like, man, what are you doing? Clear misplay. Should definitely be playing the 4 Healer's Hawks. But he is playing Auras. He was trying. He played this deck the week before this tournament, and he had, you know, the Cold Water Snapper as a 6-drop to just maximize the hexproof creatures, and he didn't have any of these 1-mana creatures in the deck. And then, you know, he lost a bunch of matches that day to not drawing enough creatures, and I told him, you know, I think you got to just play some non-hexproof creatures, and otherwise you're gonna have a bunch of auras in your hand and have nowhere to put them. So he picked the best creature that he could have to you know, stack a bunch of auras on, and just threw a bunch of Healer's Hawks in the deck. I'm not sure how good Rustwing Falcon is. I think if he had Bishop Soldier or something here, then he would have maybe done a little bit better. He did lose to the mono white decks a couple times throughout the day. I think he lost to Julian, Julian's red-white aura deck. They were just trying to pile auras onto each other, and Julian had more lifelinkers than he did. So I think Troy didn't draw Squire's Devotion in the deciding game, and his big giant creature couldn't race Julian's big giant creature. But you know, this is a really powerful deck. If the metagame is full of more removal spells, then a deck like this would be very scary, right? A control deck would have a really hard time beating a you know, a hexproof vigilance, lifelink, first strike, flying, trample creature. So shout out to Troy for playing the most unique deck that we have in our top 8. Rounding out the top 8, we have Austin playing black-white vampires. Oh, there we go. And this deck is kind of an amalgam of very different cards, but we have the good old reliable Healer's Hawk along with 4 Bishop Soldiers, so the lifelink game plan is definitely strong in this deck. He's even got some Child of Knights to kind of help support the lifelink game plan. And then instead of playing like a, you know, he still has some combat tricks in the deck, right? Vampire Zeal, Healing's Grace, Moment of Craving is very good against you know, a metagame full of other white decks. But you know, instead of playing too much instant speed interaction, Austin is just playing a higher curve. Legion Conquistador is really good if you're taking the game long, and then some of the vampire synergies such as Voracious Vampire, Sanguine Glorifier, and Anointed Deacon just kind of help to take over a long game. So you know, vampires definitely pack a punch, and you know, if the metagame slows down and there ends up being, you know, more control decks, which I'm very certain there are viable control decks in this format. You know, playing Legion Conquistador in your Healer's Hawk deck seems like, you know, a good place to be. So shout out to Austin representing the Vampire Tribal. And then the last deck that we had in our top 8 was not playing Healer's Hawk. This is the only non-Healer's Hawk deck that we have, and this was Jordan playing blue-red spells. So basically this deck is trying to get a Fire Urchin in Aven Windmage or a Wee Dragnauts into play, and then just firing off a whole bunch of spells all in one turn. So he's got, you know, some of the Jumpstart cards. Run Amok helps punch through, Sonic Assault clears away blockers, Shock and Lightning Strike, you know, can go to the Dome, or just clear away blockers. Radical Idea gives you multiple spell triggers for Wee Dragnauts. And before any of you comment that Wee Dragnauts and Lightning Strike are uncommons, yes, I know, if you're playing MTG Arena, you cannot use these cards, but we allow downshifted rarities, and Wee Dragnauts was a common in, what was this? I think this was Guild Pact? Yeah, Guild Pact. And then Lightning Strike, of course, was a common many, many times. I think, first of all, in Theros. So we do allow downshifted commons in our Standard Pauper tournaments. So unfortunately, this deck, if you're playing it on Arena, we Dragnauts is kind of the centerpiece of this deck, so you can't really play this on Arena. But this is a pretty powerful strategy. Unfortunately, trying to kill your opponent in one big hit is not very good when they start gaining life on turn 2 by hitting you with a Healer's Hawk or a Bishop Soldier or a Mesa Unicorn. So this deck is particularly weak against the white aggro decks full of lifelink creatures, but it is a very powerful strategy in general. So if the metagame kind of shifts around, I could see this deck getting its time to shine, but given the fact that Healer's Hawk is kind of on top of everything right now, I don't expect to see this deck doing all that great. I think that if you want to play a blue-red deck that revolves around spells, you need to play a control deck in the given metagame that we have right now. But that is a video for another time. We can definitely explore some of the control decks that I think are going to be viable. But this is where the metagame ended up after Guilds of Ravnica. We will continue running Youth Standard Pauper tournaments starting again in January, probably after Ravnica Allegiance comes out. And, you know, I look forward to seeing how that kind of shakes up the metagame. We'll be doing some videos on, as spoilers are coming out, MTG Arena has a Pauper event going, so stay tuned for some videos on that. And we're going to get back into the swing of things, making content. So thank you for stopping by. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and be sure to leave a like and a comment. Would love to hear from you. And as always, if you want to support what we do, support Youth Magic here on Oahu and great Standard Pauper content here on the interweb, please consider becoming a patron subscriber. As little as $1 a month. Anything that you can contribute helps. All the tournaments that we run are completely funded by our Patreon subscribers. So thank you for stopping by, and we will catch you next time. Peace.